All right, welcome to another live edition of the Couch GM podcast. This is going to be a wild one. It was the MLB trade deadline just the other day. Gary Hill Jr. is going to join us. We're going to talk all things MLB trade deadline, the Seattle Mariners deadline. But first, you might have seen Ryan Divish tweets from the other day of Mitch Garver talking about some stuff that he's received from Mariners fans or from fans in general. So I want to encourage everybody tomorrow night, give Mitch Garver a standing ovation, show him your support. He is a key piece of this team, and we need to show him as a city our support of what he does. So with that, let's bring in Gary Hill Jr., get into all things Mariners trade deadline. So Gary, first off, how are things going?
It's going good. Enjoying the off day after a long but short trip, and it's good to be back. It's going to be great to be back home after the All-Star break. It's funny, as we were coming back from Boston, the fact that we were bringing Randy Arozarena, Justin Turner, and Jimmy Garcia on the plane back with us, which is pretty funny considering they weren't there when we left, and here they are in our city and playing coming up in this next series, the next homestand, and this stretch run. So it should be fun.
Some impactful moves by the Seattle Mariners. You know, there were some names that Mariners fans had on their list that everyone wanted, of course. Vlad Guerrero Jr., there was Brent Rooker out there, Luis Robert Jr., a lot of guys that ended up not being moved at all by their teams. And when you look at the people that were moved and the fact that the Mariners were able to get Randy Arozarena, a borderline superstar, a household name, you get Justin Turner, who's a 16-year MLB veteran, 9 years in the playoffs, some impactful guys, both on the field and in the clubhouse. And just looking at stats overall, potentially two of the top six that were moved, the Mariners went out and acquired. Just take me through the series of events from an insider, you know, through the past week of when you started hearing the rumblings of who might be coming, when it actually happened, and from your perspective.
Yeah, going into it, I was actually pretty nervous about how the deadline was going to unfold because I was looking around as we got closer, and there was a couple of things that had me concerned. Is there were so many teams that were in the mix, and I think we talked about this right before the deadline. There were so many teams in the playoff mix. It just was not clear to me who would be available, and it seemed like even some of the names that you just mentioned there, even the top names, there were still some concerns with every guy. It's not like, hey, you get this guy and you are set. So I had no idea what the deadline was actually going to look like. And in some ways, it ended up being that. I know there were a lot of moves. There were 60 moves, but there weren't a lot of big names that were moved in the deadline. And the fact that the Mariners got Arozarena, I think, is enormous for two reasons. One is he's a really good offensive player, and he's been a really good offensive player. He's been an all-star. He's been the face of Tampa Bay. He's what they've built their offense around. And I think what's exciting when I was thinking about the Mariners, I was thinking about no matter what happens this year, Mariners could win the World Series. Mariners could not make the playoffs, right? No matter what happens, the Mariners are also going to have to get better offensively next season. And there's going to be a lot of work there to get done. And the fact they were able to land, I think, the biggest bat moved at the deadline. Some people may disagree with that, but that's what I would say. And the fact that he's going to be the Mariners starting left fielder next year and the year after that is enormous. So not only do I think it clearly helps the Mariners down the stretch here and try and get into the playoffs and make a run, but it's a great head start for the next couple of years. And it's funny because I was thinking about Aaron Goldsmith and I were actually talking about this. We were trying to think of the last Mariners left fielder who has started opening day in back-to-back opening days in left field. And I started to look it up. You forget some of the names, Marmoleos and guys like that have started in left field over the years. And you got to go back to Dustin Ackley as the last guy who started back-to-back seasons in left. But really, you go back to Raul Ibanez, who had it locked down for 3 years in the early 2000s, where you felt like that was a truly stable position for the Mariners. And now it feels like a stable position because he's a great hitter. I'm excited about the Justin Turner move as well. He's, what you kind of get. Heavy contact guy, doesn't have a lot of power, I think his intangibles bring a lot to the club, and he has literally been there and done everything at this level. And I think he'll be more productive than certainly what they've had in that position, mostly first base. But I think he adds a lot just being a guy players can lean on, a guy who's been in the big moments, in the big spots. So I think from that perspective, it's huge. And I know we've talked about the back end of the bullpen a lot. That was a glaring need for me. And Jimmy Garcia, who I would put in the top three in terms of relievers that were traded at the deadline. Like outside of Scott and Estevez, like Garcia's right there. So you put all that together, and I think they accomplished a lot at the deadline and checked off a couple of major needs.
Yeah, you see Randy Rosarena's name come across that Twitter feed, and you realize that it's real. That's the name that Mariners fans have been wanting for a couple off seasons now. Isak Paredes was up there as the rumors like, hey, let's get Randy and Isak. The amount of a haul that would take, would be substantial. I'm honestly surprised at how little the Mariners had to give up. Of course, Brody Hopkins and Aiden Smith are not, small prospects, but just the fact that they technically didn't have to give up their MLB rated, top 10 prospects in order to get Randy Rosarena and guys that were in, low to high A baseball prospects, that it'll be 2 to 3 years before you might see any of these guys. Were you surprised at the return that it took to get Randy?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And we still don't fully know what it is because there's a player renamed, but a
Right. There's
couple
that
things.
too.
Yeah, a couple things stuck out to me. One is they really love Aiden Smith. Like that's somebody that hurts to give up. They really, really liked where he was going. So from that perspective, they felt like they gave up a lot. At the same time, and this, we've talked about this too, is the Mariners' strength right now is draft and developing. They've done such a wonderful job, and we've seen it play out at the major league level with Cal and Kirby and Logan. But you look at Aiden Smith, who was a 4th-round pick last year, and Hopkins, who was a 6th-round pick last year for both those
Yeah.
guys. I think about all the teams and how many opportunities teams had to nab both those guys. And the Mariners got them in the 4th and the 6th. And then they pop and turn into a Rosarena. Like that is significant. That's significant. That's the
And 2.5
reason why.
years of Randy Rosarena.
Right. Right. This is not like a rental thing for just a couple months. And
Right.
that to me is a big statement. And that's why they didn't have to touch their top 9 prospects, depending on which list you go off of. But the heavy hitters, they didn't have to go to make a move like this. I think it speaks volumes about what the Mariners are doing at the development level. And yeah, and I'm one that when I look at trades like this, like I'm fine if Aiden Smith goes on and becomes an all-star, if a Rosarena does what you want him to do, right? It's like the Castillo deal. I thought that was a great trade for the Mariners. It's been a great trade for the Mariners. He's helped the Mariners to the postseason. Chance he does it again. If Marte, whoever else, turns into a multi-time all-star, that's fine. I think both teams can win a trade. So if Aiden Smith goes on and Hopkins goes on to have nice Tampa Bay careers, great. But I think a Rosarena is really going to help them. And it's funny. He is, there weren't many guys like this moved at the deadline where we were on the bus in Chicago getting ready to go to the ballpark. And, it's so routine. I mean, we live our lives on buses where we bus to the ballpark, we bus home, we bus to the airport. It's all the time, right? So we're just kind of there waiting. And there he is. Randy Rosarena walks on the bus. And at that moment, it's like, man, it becomes very real as he's shaking everyone's hand, introducing himself. Randy, I'm Randy. It's like, yeah, everyone's, hey, Randy. Hey, Randy. I mean, it's a real thing. And it's one of those intangibles that you can't measure, but the vibes turned immediately. Because as we all know, it was a rough stretch right before the All-Star break and then after the All-Star break, and everything shifted. Like after the trade was announced and once he showed up, it was like the vibes changed just by his addition. And he's obviously going to be a super important part to what the Mariners do down the stretch. And I can't wait to see Julio and a Rosarena in the same outfield. That's going to be pretty fun.
Yeah, Randy joins the team and he's not even at the field yet. And the Mariners thank the front office by putting up 10 runs, 11 hits against the White Sox. Of course, it's the White Sox, but Thorpe was on the mound. The next day it was Fetty. They got the win there. Crochet on the mound the next day. They put up, 10 runs, 6 runs, back to back to back days. And again, looking at the prospect haul, Randy had a slow start to the year. In April and March, he had a 143 batting average. In May, he had a 178. I don't know if it was a buy low, but you look at some of the hauls that these teams were able to get at the trade deadline or what they had to send away. The Houston Astros sent their second, third, and 26 overall prospects to get 2 months of Yusei Kikuchi. And you look at how much the Padres had to send away to get Tanner Scott, who is one of the best arms in the market, and some other bullpen depth. But you look at what the Mariners gave up, and then you just think of it might just mean that the Mariners farm system really is that strong to where, their 12th ranked prospect, 22nd ranked prospects were able to get Randy. And then these other teams, their second, third prospects have to go get a rental, below average pitcher, basically. So a lot happened, and it's kind of telling of where the Mariners system is, how good their drafting and developing is. And I mean, I think it was just some great moves overall by the front office.
Yeah, it was good to not have to try and find a starting pitcher. Like if you're looking for a starter,
Right.
It was rough because, even Baltimore gave up a lot, and what they got are not sure things. One better than the other, but and you mentioned Houston, they gave up a ton for Kikuchi, who hasn't been pitching great. It's better than what they have, clearly, but they emptied, and they don't have a lot of prospects to give either, which I think hurts Houston even more. But yeah, if you were in the market for starting pitching, it was rough. And big name, I just keep getting back to, because when I look at deadlines and compare how teams did, I I don't I can't count guys that weren't moved, right? Like, I don't know how realistic. I know Vladimir Guerrero's name was out there a lot. I don't know how realistic that was. Like, the Blue Jays were sellers, but they only sold their free agents. They didn't budge past that. There's no Bassett. There's no Bo, who's injured, but there's no Vlad. So it doesn't feel like that was ever real. And Rooker probably wasn't real either, because sometimes you have to look at the other side. We tend to look at things through the Mariners lens a lot, but you got to look at things from the other side and ask yourself, okay, why would Oakland move Rooker when they have 3 more years left with him? And the only reason they would is if you handed them everything, right? And so that's how I think when we analyze deadlines, comparison is probably the best way to do it. And I think when you compare the Mariners deadline, it was a really good deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at, as I mentioned, the Astros, the Rangers didn't do much. The Astros are absolutely hurting for pitching compared to the AL West. The Mariners put themselves in a spot to have a true shot at winning the division now. Of course, as we've said all season, some of these guys that they signed in the offseason for offense, they're going to have to regress upward towards their, career norms. And some of that has to happen for them to have that shot. But I mean, it puts them in a great spot. Rosarena basically is like adding a Julio 2.0 to where it's like, now it's Victor Robles, prime Victor Robles, who we picked up for nothing. And, former 5-tool prospect, top 5 overall prospect. I'm curious if you've heard about, what changes he actually made. It sounds like there was just a lot of pressure that was taken off of Victor Robles when he left Washington and when he came here. And Jared DeHart apparently said something that stuck with him and started working right away. So he's been just lighting it up. But, you got Robles, Randy, Julio, Cal, somewhere in that order as your top 4 now. And just the sky's the limit there. What have you seen from Robles, or what have you heard about his changes?
Well, it's been super fun. Like, the whole Robles thing has been awesome because it literally came out of nowhere. Like, he was a guy when the Mariners first grabbed him, Class A was on the roster at the time, and it was kind of just filling the start against lefties, outfield defense replacement, maybe pinch run late in the ball game, which is not where you wanted, like Class A, because you don't want your 21-year-old in that role, because you can go a
Mhm.
week without starting if you don't face a lefty. But Robles is a guy that's been around, he's been a veteran, and he fit in that role really well. And that was exciting to have a guy like that in the role. And you were just hoping, hey, be a productive player, bat against lefties. I mean, he has blown that away. He's been ridiculous. One of the best offensive players the past month in baseball.
Yeah.
And you're right. He made a mechanical switch with JD, which I think is part of it. There's clearly, and you alluded to this, like he spent his whole career in Washington, and he was a guy that was really highly thought of, who had a lot of expectations throughout his career about who he would be and the kind of star player he would be. And it just didn't work out for him in Washington. And he's really struggling this year, and they let him go. And when you watch him play right now, he looks like a guy that's just having the time of his life, playing free and easy and loose, which has been the opposite of what we've seen for a lot of Mariners hitters, to be honest, given the circumstances. Like, it has been a real grind, as we've all watched with Mariners hitters this year, because of the struggles. And Robles has been the complete contrast of that. He has come at such an important time for the Mariners in doing what he's doing. And I feel like with his addition, Rosarena's been hitting, Turner's been hitting before they got here. Like, it does add a whole new element and feeling to the lineup. You hope at some point soon Julio's back. You hope you can add JP to the mix. You hope that Polanco is more like the Polanco we've seen as of late, especially on this trip. And then, with Cal in the mix, you really got something working there. And then you can platoon your way in a couple other spots to try and get optimal production. But it feels like you have some things working in the right direction where most of the season you just didn't.
Absolutely. And that's where, um, you start to see the offense that you anticipated coming into the season. Victor Robles with the Nationals this year, he was batting 120 with a 401 OPS, which is a 23 OPS plus through 14 games, 33 plate appearances. Then he comes here and in essentially double the time, double the plate appearances, almost triple the plate appearances. He's batting 360 with a 942 OPS, a 174 OPS plus. He's been 74% better than the average hitter. On top of that, he's got the wheels to steal bases. And then you bring in, Justin Turner's first game. There's the clubhouse part, and he's the contact hitter that the Mariners have been needing. I wanted Luis Rengifo because he brings that same versatility as far as contact. Justin Turner doesn't try to do too much. You look at his baseball savant, and his bat speed is in the lowest 1% of all of baseball. But that's because he's not trying to crush the ball. He's not trying to put it over the wall. He's just trying to dink it into right field to score the run. And that's what this team really needs more than anything.
He's just a pro too. Even if he flies out or whatever, you're going to get a quality plate appearance when he's up. And he's not always going to come through, but he will enough, which we've already seen in Fenway Park in his first at bat, driving in a run. But that's what you're getting. And it's in a spot where you weren't getting that before. So I think that makes a big difference. And the Robles thing, I'm super curious to see where this goes. Like, I think it's too much to expect this the rest of the way. Like, he's not going to slash this the rest of the season because he's been out of control good. But I'm intrigued by the changes, and I'm intrigued by the under the hood. You look at his hard hit rate, it's way up. I mean, his barrels are, he's only had one season in his career with more barrels than he's had this year. And that's all with the Mariners in a pretty short time. So he's hitting the ball harder than he's ever hit it before. So from that perspective, like, I don't think he'll carry the same slash, but I think he can still be a productive player. And the question is, like, how productive? And and Cal talked about this recently. The way he set the table at the top of the lineup they just have not had that this year. He has been a great table setter, and it seems like he's on base 3 times a game. I mean, that's the way it feels. And when you have a guy that's doing that, it changes everything.
Absolutely. And you look at, Victor's baseball savant from the past like 4 years, and it's all blue. He was a a 5-tool prospect with the power and the contact and all that. But all of his metrics, he had like the slowest exit velocities in the National League, like year over year. This type of stuff that, and as Richard mentions here, feels like Robles is a reverse Kelnick. It's like a change of scenery is sometimes all that you need. You get shipped off or you move, and that's what you needed. And then let's see here.
I think about that all the time in baseball. I think about when guys at this level are so talented. There's so many really good players at this level. And I think a lot of times it can come down to opportunity and who's your opportunities with. And maybe you run into the right coach that makes the one adjustment that you needed. Maybe you're in the spot that lets you just play, and some guys that never happens for, who, I don't know, could have had a 7-year big league career, but they weren't in the right place at the right time. And maybe for Robles, he has found his right place at the right time.
What's your opinion when JP is healthy, when Julio is healthy? I know Scott loves the, handiness back and forth. I really like at the top Victor Robles, Randy Rosarena, Julio, and then Cal, JP and Josh Rojas, or whoever's at third base somewhere towards the bottom. Do you put JP Crawford back there at leadoff, or do you let Victor Robles run with it?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think you'll have to answer that for a while. I think JP is still going to be down for a few weeks, but if Robles is still this, you've got to ride him out as the leadoff man. He's cooking too much. You can't turn that away. And it's happened before with JP. He's moved down at the bottom and then worked his way back up. So that wouldn't be unprecedented. And I think he would certainly get it. And I kind of like, because I was thinking about the same thing, how you would line this up. And I think that's exactly how I would do it, is how you laid it out. With, at least right now, Robles, Randy, Julio, Cal as your first four. And then, I don't know, Turner after that?
Right, yeah, I was thinking Turner and then Polanco and then Garver.
Yeah.
And yeah, because now there's the amount of depth in the lineup to where you can move Julio down to the 3 spot now, give him that opportunity to drive in the more runs. And then he's also sandwiched between Randy and Cal, which protects him a bit. So he won't be, some pitchers will have to start pitching to him. And you have Cal on the year that he's having right now. His batting average, is never there, but he's got 23 plus bombs. There's the threat in all parts of the lineup now. And then, you got Turner and then Polanco after that. Mitch Garver, he's got like we've talked about, he's got to regress to somewhere around his career norm. And then the guys after that. So I'm really impressed with the deadline and the fact, just seeing the names that were moved, the guys that they were able to get at the cost that they got them at. I think it was a great success there.
Yeah, I think it's super exciting, and it's a real difference maker for him. And it's funny because I always think about, okay, ask yourself as a Mariners fan, what other players were moved at the deadline that you felt like, oh, we missed out on that? And it's a pretty short list, which I also think speaks to the kind of deadline they had. Like Arozarena and Turner, as you mentioned, WRC plus, they're both in the top 6 this year. So that's good work on the Mariners' part. And as you mentioned too, they got to get better in-house. Like, this is going to come from both. Like, players that have been here all season will have to get better. They'll have to do their part as well. They'll have to be better at closing out close ball games. They've lost, I think, 7 one-run games in a row, which is very unlike them given what we've seen the last number of years. So they've got to get better at late in ball games too, which I think Garcia is going to help with that. The off day came at a really good time too. In fact, off day series, another off day, because man, they were pretty beat up by the end of the Boston series. Santos is up in the air, obviously. Polanco had to leave the game. Robles didn't start. Turner's dealing with something a pretty beat up group. So a couple off days coming up, reset the bullpen as well, will be really helpful, because the last Boston game, they were not equipped for extra innings. That was a bad day for extras.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about Santos. I believe he was supposed to get an MRI today on his bicep. Do you know how he's feeling right now? He's had a couple different things pop up since he came back from the IL. He's a big part of the bullpen. Yeah.
Yeah, we won't find out until we get to the ballpark tomorrow. Off day, there's never any news. So when we get to the ballpark, I assume we'll hear more about Julio too. Hopefully, we'll get some word on more of a timeline of what we're looking at there. Santos thing, hearing about the bicep after the fact is not great news. I wouldn't expect. I don't know. Last time he didn't go on the IL, but I don't know. My hopes aren't high that he would not go to the IL, but that's just a straight guess. I really don't have any information on that. And they've gone most of the year without him. Shaggy's back, which I guess would help in the back end of the bullpen. But yeah, they're gonna Garcia and Munoz certainly will get leaned on here down the stretch.
Yeah, I was gonna mention Jimmy Garcia wasn't the only, reliever acquired at the deadline. JT Chargois is coming back to Seattle. What can you tell me about JT and his profile and what we might see from him?
Well, I know he's super pumped to be back, and sinker slider guy. He threw the slider a ton when he was here in Seattle. He hasn't thrown it as much in Miami. He hasn't pitched for most of the season, but he's 15 games or so as of late, healthy and pitching. His surface numbers look great. The under the hood don't look as sparkling, but again, he's the kind of pitcher where he's back with this group. Pete Woodworth, everyone, Trent Blank, they all know him. So I imagine they'll go right to work on, okay, what can we do to turn the dial here? Because he was a huge part of the bullpen when he was here the first time around. And they're going to need him. And he profiles to me as a guy, we've talked about Brash missing, and it's been such a big loss for the Mariners. And Brash was kind of the pivot guy for the Mariners. When they needed somebody to get a big out, he was the guy they went to. And that role has never been really firmly established this year. Shaggy, to me, kind of profiles as a guy that could fit that, just because not as much swing and miss as Brash, of course, because no one does that. But he can get you a ground ball, which is also very helpful in that situation, kind of like what Topa did last year. So maybe he moves himself into that kind of role.
Yeah, and I was doing the trade deadline recap today and looking at his profile. He's got the sinker slider, as you mentioned. Opponents are batting 286 with a 486 slug off of his sinker. His slider, opponent's batting average is a 179, expected batting average of 154, a slug of 286. So it seems that slider is a great pitch, and that, as you mentioned, the first time around that he was here, he was throwing that slider around. I think he might be ripping that slider quite often when he's in Seattle again.
Yeah, I think we'll see it. I think if I remember right, I think he was around 60% last time he was here throwing the slider. So I would imagine that we'll see that creep up too with his second time around with the Mariners.
Up to this point in the season, right now, Mariners and Astros are tied first place in the AL West. The Rangers are 4.5 games back. They decided to buy a little bit, not sell. What do you think about the division race right now at this point with where the lineups are at and at this point in the season?
It feels like a two-team race, although I know Texas, certainly you can't count them out, obviously, but it feels like it's Seattle and Houston down the stretch. It also feels like a coin toss. Like I I don't think anyone would be shocked either way if you said, "Oh, the Mariners won the division" or "the Astros won the division." I think it's super close, and it's probably going to be tight all the way because you know, as much as the Mariners have struggled here the past month, and the Astros haven't played great either, and they have some issues. They tried to address it, as we mentioned with Kikuchi. We'll see if that helps or not. Basically, they've had three healthy starters and a couple of rookies at the back end trying to make it happen. Verlander maybe coming back soon. We'll see what that brings to the table. Like, how much of a difference will that make? I don't know. And the one that I'm really watching too with Houston, when I think about them, is Tucker has been out for a long time, fouled a ball off his shin. And I don't think anyone knew at the time that he would still be dealing with this. And it doesn't sound like he's necessarily close to being back. That's a huge bat that's not in their lineup. and their lineup is just not quite the same without him. And I think they've missed him. So between the rotation and Tucker, that's kind of what I'm looking for from Houston. I think August to me is really going to tell the story because their schedule gets really rough towards the end of the month. And I think they play Tampa Bay a couple times at the beginning of the month, and it's probably a pretty good time to catch them after they unloaded some guys. Tampa's still a tricky matchup, I think, no matter what. But once they get past a White Sox series in the middle of the month, they go Red Sox, Baltimore, Phillies, Kansas City. And that's a rough stretch. And the thing that has stood out to me about Houston is they have played really well against teams below 500, and they've really struggled against teams above 500 for the most part, like more so than most. Like every team to an extent is like that, but them to a more extreme. So if that continues to play out, that would be a big opportunity for the Mariners, basically the back half of August.
Absolutely. And the Mariners are heading into a series against the Phillies tomorrow. They're going to miss out on the tougher arms with the Phillies. Phillips has a low ERA, but looks like I think he's a pretty young guy. Then you got Allard right after that, who was with the Rangers before, and then you got Zach Wheeler on Sunday. What are your thoughts heading into this series against the Phillies? I think it's going to be a real test for the Mariners to see where they're at, especially at home.
Yeah, huge test. Phillies are really good, and I know they didn't play well in their last series against New York, and it is helpful. They're going to get Wheeler, obviously, but if you're going to draw 3 Phillies pitchers, that's a good draw. Only getting one of their frontline guys, but they can hit, they can slug, and they can put runs on the board in a hurry. So it's a big ask to hold the Phillies to 2 or 3 runs a ball game. So this feels like a series where the Mariners are going to have to find a way to score some runs to get a series win. And while the Astros are playing Tampa Bay, it's going to be this mirror match the whole time. Like every day, it's what are you doing? What are the Astros doing? And so, when you're playing the Phillies in a 3-game series, in a really tough series at home, you got to try and find a way to win the series because you can't expect the Astros to lose a series to this Tampa Bay club. So from that perspective, it puts the Mariners in a tough spot, but we'll see. It'll be good to be home. I know the crowds are going to be great. I'm super excited to see what the Arozarena greeting is going to look like. I think it's going to be pretty raucous. I think Justin Turner will get a nice hand as well. I think the energy is going to be off the charts. So I hope the Mariners play really well in the series because I think the entire weekend, the atmosphere is going to be great.
It's going to be electric. What are your thoughts on does Randy Land stay in Tampa, or do the Mariners bring Randy Land to above Edgar's?
I don't know. I would love if Randy Land were here. I have no problems with stealing it, bringing it with him.
You got the J-Rod squad in center. You got Randy Land in left.
Let's go for it. I love it.
Yeah.
I think he'd love it too.
Absolutely. And then internally, what are the vibes in the front office, in the broadcasting booth, and among everyone inside the front office?
The vibes are good because I feel like the deadline changed everything because the vibes were not good before the deadline, given just the struggles, and especially on the offensive side. And it felt like, man, and part of that was the uncertainty of what would happen at the deadline because there were no guarantees that you could land enough to move the needle on your offense. At least that's how I was looking at it. So you're trying to figure out like how is this going to happen? And now I think you can map it out exactly how it can happen between the moves they've made and guys coming back and everything else. Because the thing at the time is they had a struggling offense, and then you lose Julio and JP, and it's like, what? This is not good. Like, where is this going to go? And they're still in a tough spot without Julio, and whenever he's missing from the lineup, it's going to be tough. So they're certainly not at full strength without JP as well, but they're in a much better position after the deals. That's for sure. So I think everyone's optimistic about what's going to happen here the final 2 months of the season. And I know I've heard this from the front office. I tend to believe them. Is they don't feel like the Mariners have played their best baseball of the season yet. I think the Mariners are where they are, yet they haven't been consistent. They haven't put it all together, I guess is how I would think about it. We've seen the rotation's been great, and that's been steady all year. Bullpen has had some up and downs, some hiccups, and the offense has struggled. And the offense gets a little better, mid-pack. You're talking about runs scored, for example. I mean, that's a game changer. Like, as much as they struggled and all these losses in this recent stretch, they've all been close for the most part, except for that game against the Red Sox. But you look at the game logs, 3-2, 2-1, 4-3. It's a lot of those type of games. So it's funny because I was saying before the deadline, I was saying a lot like one guy isn't going to ride in and save the day. I still think that's true. At the same time, given all the one-run games that they're playing and they've lost as of late, like one guy can make a pretty big difference. Like, what if they had Randy in the entire stretch, which isn't realistic because the deadline. I'm just saying as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many games does he alone turn around because of a base hit? Do they win 3 of those? Like 7? I don't know. But the margins for the Mariners are so narrow and so thin that one guy can make a difference and 2 guys can make a difference. And then if somebody else comes along for the ride like Polanco, that can make an extended difference. So that's how I'm thinking about it. And I know everyone's super excited to see where this thing goes.
Yeah, and you don't need the Mariners to have the best offense in baseball. You don't need to have them have a top 10 baseball in offense, top 10 on offense in baseball. They just can't be 28th best in baseball for them to go where they want to be. And yeah, you talk about having Randy for a series or Justin Turner. I'm really curious to see, and I hope that it rubs off. But just Justin Turner's approach to the plate and situational hitting, that's something that's been missing. Is I feel like the maturity of the plate appearances and feeling the situation. We talked about in the years past about not being the hero, just get the job done. If you move a runner over, that's what's needed at sometimes. So I'm curious to see how his approach and preparation to the game rubs off on those younger guys, and if it just evolves into more mature approaches across the board for these people. So
he's a calming presence. That's for sure. I think at the deadline, they added 130 playoff games between Turner, Garcia, and Rosarena. Rosarena, who we haven't talked about, has been one of the truly best playoff performers in baseball history, which I don't say lightly, but between those 3 guys, they've done a lot in this game. And especially with Turner, he just profiles. I mean, he's just been in playoff series year in and year out. He's just calming is how I would think about him. It's just great to have a vet like that in the lineup, truly, with a fairly young team.
Yeah, and Randy, he was the ALCS MVP in 2020, his rookie year. He won Rookie of the Year that year. He has the record for the most home runs in a single postseason. Of course, there was more postseason games during COVID, but it was only by like a game or 2 more than the guys behind him. So they have the experience. They're going to perform under pressure, and yeah, it's a huge ad. What other stories around the? Yeah, go for it.
I was looking at postseason slugging percentage all time, at least 25 games. It is Babe Ruth, number 1, Lou Gehrig, number 2, and Randy Arozarena, number 3. So that tells you what his in 25 games. I guess that's not a small sample when it comes to playoffs. So that tells you the kind of playoff career that guy's had.
Yeah, I did not know that. That's gonna have to be a short.
It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Like whenever you find yourself on a list with Ruth and Gehrig, like you were doing something right.
That's amazing. What other stories around the league are intriguing to you right now?
Man, there's so many. I feel like I'm still trying to sift through all the repercussions of the trade deadline, uh, and how it's going to affect teams. Because like Baltimore added a lot, but it seems like Baltimore went really high risk, high reward to me. Like their deadline could end up being nothing, or if Eloy ends up for whatever reason having like a great month, then it's one of those that I have no idea. It seems so volatile. And I guess deadlines are that way anyway. We never truly know until it's all said and done. Like it's always these moves that you never think about on deadline day that end up having the biggest impact a lot of the time. So I feel like I'm still sifting through that. I'm also sifting through, is this the norm for deadlines now? Because of the structure of Major League Baseball and because of the playoff scenario right now. And are we to a point now where there's going to be this many teams involved in the mix every year? So is it going to be a seller's market every year now? And a team like Tampa Bay just, whoosh, they go all in and selling. They pick up a haul because there's no one else selling, or is this just kind of cyclical? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do wonder if that changes how teams look at their offseason and feel like they have to make sure they get more done in the offseason, because filling a hole, especially with pitching, like finding a starting pitcher was brutal. And you look at the starters that were
Mhm.
moved, and I mean, maybe Flaherty ends up being a game changer. I don't know about you. I didn't see a lot of game changers being moved, like guys that you would start in game one of a series in a rotation, right? I didn't see a lot of those guys.
Yeah, it
And
was more so depth pieces. I mean,
yeah,
you would have thought that the White Sox would have dealt Crochet, especially with. I mean, he had the comments about if you want me to pitch in October, you got to extend me type stuff. And Tarek Skubal from the Tigers, but the White Sox missed out on a massive haul. You know, you hear about comparisons of like the potential Soto hauls that the Nationals got from years past for some of those pitchers. At some, I feel like some of those franchises at some point, it's like, okay, you try to get top dollar out of that. And if it's not quite the Soto thing, it's like, okay, we'll take as much as we can get. Because look at what the Marlins did. They moved a ton of guys for Trevor Rogers and these other guys that they traded. They got quite the haul from the Orioles and from other teams. So,
and then there
I've
were
been
a
looking
bunch.
at the articles. The big losers are the teams that should have sold and
Yes,
didn't sell enough.
yes, and that's also what surprised me about the deadline is you look at a team like the Rockies that just sat still, and not
And the
like they
Twins,
had the Twins didn't do anything. And but I think of a team like the Rockies or the Angels. Angels made a couple of deals, but some of these teams could have really set themselves up nicely. But there was a lot more in action with some teams than I was expecting. And
and
your guy Rengifo didn't go anywhere.
well, I mean, last year, like, why didn't the Angels trade Shohei when they could have?
I
It's
know.
like, what are you doing? Like, that's the prime opportunity. And instead of doing that, now your farm system is bottom 3 in baseball. Right there with the Astros, they're bottom 5 in baseball.
Hmm.
And now the Mariners are in a prime spot. It's like last time we're on the podcast just talking about how I feel blessed and cursed to be a Mariners fan. Right now, I feel blessed because they were able to go out and get these guys. They have one of the top farm systems in baseball still. They have huge potential moving into next year and the rest of this year. So yeah, I would hate to be an Angels fan and some of those other fans right now.
Yeah, it wasn't a pretty deadline for some teams. It was a weird deadline. But again, I'm curious what this is going to look like moving forward. And that's it. There's no waiver deadline. That it's teams are done. So uh I don't know. I find this whole thing fascinating, especially in the National League. Like if you made me pick who I think is going to the postseason in the National League, I have no idea where to start. Like, it is such a mess with all teams involved. I kind of hope the Pirates get in. Like that,
Oh
I
yeah,
think would be super
that'd
fun.
be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, like I would love
And
to
the
see
Pirates
Scenes.
were, yeah, the Pirates were buyers at the deadline, which I was really encouraged to see.
Yeah,
I have Skeens and Jared Jones on my fantasy team, so selfishly, I wanted them to be contending.
Yes. Yes. So let me ask you this. Uh, the Mariners are playing the Pirates in Pittsburgh in this upcoming road trip. As somebody who wants to see the Mariners win, would you rather them miss Skeens or do you want to see Skeens pitch against the Mariners? How do you feel about this?
I mean, I personally want to see him face them just because, I mean, it's Skeens. He's the best pitcher in baseball, arguably. I mean, we know what to expect going into it. We'll see if their offense turns it around, if they magically stop striking out as much. You know, with guys like him, it's like you can't not strike out. But I could go both ways. You know, it's like I want to see Skeens, but I'm fine with watching Skeens when he's not facing the Mariners just as much. You know, it's like let's just miss him. Let's take that series. Jared Jones won't be back by then, I don't think. Also, so you got the Pirates in a vulnerable spot, as vulnerable as they'll be.
Okay, so if you could handpick the Mariners starter to go against Skeens, who would you want to see one on one?
I'd have to say Logan Gilbert right now.
Okay,
You know, the all-star guy. I want to see Kirby throw that knuckleball more. I know it was another tribute to the Red Sox, and he missed
that
the
was
zone on
great.
that one. But yeah, same question to you. Like, would you want Luis Castillo going against Skeens, or who would you want to see against Skeens?
This is probably recency, but I was just looking at this today. Kirby in his last, going into his last start, I guess. So before his last start, although it hasn't changed that much. His last 11 starts, he carried a 1.84 ERA into his last start in Boston. He's been great. And what has been striking in that stretch, he has like 8 walks and he's allowed 2 homers. Like, it's the part of his game I don't think we emphasize enough. His homer suppression is off the charts. The only ERA better in that stretch, Paul Skeens, 1.81 ERA in that stretch. So line me up with not only 2 of the best pitchers in the game, but 2 of the hottest pitchers in the game as well. And in Pittsburgh at that park, I mean, that would be pretty great.
I love that. That'd be electric. I mean, you saw Kirby in Fenway; he was pumping 98, and yeah, we don't. You can only appreciate so much how of a unicorn pitcher Kirby is. The
Mhm.
fact that he's in the upper 90s with his disgusting stuff and the location that he's able to locate his pitches with. I assume you've been to PNC before.
Yes.
That
It's
looks like a gorgeous
fabulous.
ballpark.
Yeah, in fact, this picture right here on the wall behind me, that's Roberto Clemente. And if anyone is ever in Pittsburgh, I got that at the Roberto Clemente Museum, which is not too far from PNC Park. It's a wonderful museum. Clemente, who of course was a great ball player, but a greater man. You learn all about him. The pictures are incredible. I love, like, black and white baseball photography is my very favorite thing in the world, and so I just fell in love with that picture and a bunch of others there. But it is well worth the visit. I really liked Pittsburgh as a town. I thought it was super fun, and the ballpark is spectacular. The views are phenomenal. It's definitely, if you're there, if you get a chance to go, especially for this series coming up, like, you'll have a great time. I guarantee it. It's well worth it.
Did you do the walk across the bridge?
Yes, we actually stay downtown. So yeah, it's just a walk across the Roberto Clemente Bridge. It's the
Mhm.
gold bridge that you see on the shots in the outfield, and the river's right there. It's man, it looks great. While I was there too, the other thing I did is I took a jog to a cemetery that was down the road where Josh Gibson was laid to rest. And for years, Josh Gibson had an unmarked grave. And it was just recently that they now Josh Gibson and pay tribute to one of the greatest ball players the game has ever seen. So, but the walk along the river right by the ballpark is great. Football stadium's there too, and it's such a unique place because it's the only sports town where all the big three have the same colors. So you see black and yellow everywhere because whether you're a Penguins fan or a Steelers fan or a Pirates fan or all three, they all carry the same colors. It's such a unique thing. Like you see the same color scheme all over the place.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize that part.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't think anyone else is like that. I think it's just Pittsburgh.
I guess big three is basketball, right?
I mean, you could any big three combo. You could do hockey,
Because I'm thinking Seattle. You know, you got the Seahawks, you got the Mariners, the Kraken. That they have the same colors
similar,
or similar at least. Yeah, not black and yellow, the same
Yeah,
type of
pretty
congruency.
close though.
Do they let broadcasters inside the Green Monster?
Yes, I've been
You
inside the
do?
Green Monster. Yeah,
Do they give you a Sharpie?
I have not signed it just because I don't know. I don't feel worthy of signing the wall inside the Green Monster. I love Fenway Park. It is phenomenal. I know it's brutal for Mariners fans to watch games there sometimes because it seems like at least once a series a game goes completely off the rails, but that place is magic. I love baseball history, so just thinking about Ted Williams stood right there, or there was Babe Ruth right there on that very same field, and they've done such a great job of maintaining the park and just keeping the same exact feel on the way it used to be. So, Pesky's pole and uh, on top of the monster now, which is great. Inside the monster, the whole thing is just phenomenal, and it's such a festive atmosphere for people that's never been because it's a neighborhood ballpark. So there's right outside the ballpark. There's just people hanging around and eating and drinking and everything else. It is a great time. So again, if you haven't made your way to Fenway, I ran into a few people that were making their first trip. As you remember, the Mariners got blown apart the first game there in Fenway,
Yeah.
and so I talked to a few different people. Like, yeah, this is our first trip to Fenway. Well, yeah, sorry. I hope you're here for the
They
game tomorrow too.
man, they utilize that monster like no other.
I
Just like
know,
shot
one
after
after
shot,
another.
just tank jobs.
It's so wild the first time you walk in there because you've seen it a million times on TV. Yet when you walk in and lay eyes on the monster in person for the first time, it is like nothing you've ever seen before. And it also feels like it's 10 feet away. I can't imagine trying to pitch. In
Yeah.
fact, yeah, I was talking to Mike Blowers about this, who obviously used to play there, and he said Lou Piniella would try and cut down on their batting practice there because everyone would just try and just hit him over the monster as far as they could during BP, which wasn't exactly great when you get into a ball game, but
Yeah.
it's an amazing scene.
Have you seen that red seed out in the outfield?
Yeah.
Do you think it's
Uh,
real?
so I love to think that it's real, even though it looks utterly and totally impossible. But it is Ted Williams. So if anyone were to do it, Ted Williams could do it. I had a long conversation with Aaron and Mike about this, about Ted Williams before one of the games, because sometimes I feel like it gets lost, which is weird. This is a weird thing to say. Like, I think everyone recognizes how great of a ball player and how great of a hitter he was. But the thing that stands out, like if you go to his reference page, you look at his 1942 season, and he hit 356 with a 499 on base. He had 34 doubles, 36 homers. And those numbers were down from the previous year where he hit 406 with a 553 on base. But anyway, so after that 42 season, he goes to WAR for 3 years.
Wow.
3 of his seasons in his prime, 24, 25, 26, gone. Then he comes back, age 27 season after WAR, hits 342 with a 497 on base, 38 homers, 37 doubles. it's utterly absurd, the career that he had, yet 3 of his prime years were wiped off the map. And we talk about greatest hitter on the planet. Like, if you put 3 of his just average in that stretch years would have been, I mean, he hit 521 homers as it was. You
Jeez,
had 100 more to that. I mean, he
that's
was a
insane.
lifetime 382 on base. As a
That's ridiculous.
41-year-old, he had a 451 on base, hit 316 in his final season.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
incredible.
if I had a time machine
I know.
and
Wouldn't that be
I could
amazing?
go, I could go back and just watch one game back in those days. One to accurately gauge like how good the pitching was,
Mhm.
so that we could greater appreciate the hitting stats back then, and just to see, yeah, that those atmospheres and that's just insane. Getting on base every other time that
Half
he's
the
up at the
time.
plate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If I had a time machine, Satchel Paige is that's who I'd want to see. I'd love one time
there you
just to
go.
watch Satchel pitch in a game.
I heard that when Big Poppy was back in his prime, that he took batting practice with an aluminum bat to try to hit that seat, and he still didn't come close.
That doesn't surprise me, because as close as the monster seems, the red seat, it is mile away from home plate. It does look impossible, but because I'm a romantic about the game, I choose to believe.
Yeah, right. It's like Santa.
That's right. And no one can tell me any different. Santa exists, and so does the red seat. It actually happened.
Yeah, I love it. Gary, really appreciate your time. Another great episode. Thank you to all that tuned in to watch and comment. Make sure to like and subscribe. Tune in this weekend. And again, let's make a standing ovation for Mitch Garver tomorrow night at T-Mobile Park in Seattle. It's going to be an electric series against the Phillies. Again, Gary, thank you. And we'll see y'all next time.